The Grateful Beasts. There was once upon a time a man and woman who had 3 fine-looking sons, but they were so poor that they could hardly have enough food for themselves, let alone their children. So the sons determined to set out into the world to try their luck. Before starting, their mother gave them each a loaf of bread and her blessing, and having taken a tender farewell of her and their father, the 3 set forth on their travels. The youngest of the 3 brothers, whose name was Furco, was a beautiful youth with a splendid figure, blue eyes, fair hair, and a complexion like milk and roses. His 2 brothers were as jealous of him as they could be, for they thought that his good looks he would be sure to be fortunate, or at least more fortunate than they could ever be. One day, all 3 were sitting resting under a tree, for the sun was hot and they were tired of walking. Furco fell fast asleep, but the other 2 remained awake, and the eldest said to the second brother, "What do you say about doing to our brother some harm? He is beautiful, and everyone takes a fancy to him, which is more than they do to us. If we could only get him out of the way, we might succeed better." "I quite agree with you," answered the second brother, "and my advice is to eat up his loaf of bread, and then to refuse to give him a bit of ours until he has promised to let us put out his eyes or break his legs." The eldest brother was delighted with this proposal, and the 2 wicked wretches seized Furco's bread and ate it all up, while the poor boy was still sound asleep. When he did awake, he felt very hungry and turned to eat his bread, but his brothers cried out, "You ate your loaf in your sleep, you glutton, and you may starve as long as you like, but we won't give you a scrap of ours." Virgo was at a loss to understand how he could have eaten in his sleep, but he said nothing and fasted all day and the next night. But on the following morning he was so hungry that he burst into tears and implored his brothers to give him just a little bit of their bread. Then the cruel creatures laughed and repeated what they had said the day before. But when Furco continued to beg and beseech them, the eldest said at last, "If you will let us put out one of your eyes and break one of your legs, then we will give you a bit of our bread." At these words, poor Furco wept more bitterly than before, and bore the torments of hunger till the sun was high in the heavens. Then he could stand it no longer, and he consented to allow his left eye to be put out and his left leg to be broken. I guess he's alright. When this was done, he stretched out his hand eagerly for a piece of bread, but his brothers gave him such a tiny scrap that the starving youth finished it in a moment and besought them for a second bit. But the more Furco wept and told his brothers that he was dying of hunger, the more they laughed and scolded him for his greed. So he endured the pangs of starvation all that day. But when night came, his endurance gave way, and he let his right eye be put out, and his left leg be broken for a second piece of bread. After his brothers had thus successfully maimed and disfigured him for life, they left him groaning on the ground and continued their journey without him. Poor Furco ate up the scrap of bread they had left him and wept bitterly, but no one heard him or came to his help. Night came on, and the poor blind youth had no eyes to close, and could only crawl on the ground, not knowing in the least where he was going. But when the sun was once more high in the heavens, Furco felt the blazing heat scorch him, and sought for some cool, shady place to rest his aching limbs. He climbed to the top of a hill and lay down in the grass, and as he thought, under the shadow of a big tree. But it was no tree he leaned against, but the gallows on which two ravens were seated. The one was saying to the other as the weary youth lay down, "Is there anything the least wonderful or remarkable about this neighborhood?" "I think there just was," replied the other. "Many things that don't exist anywhere else in this world. There's a lake down there below us, and anyone who bathes in it, though he were at death's door, becomes sound and well on the spot. And those who wash their eyes with dew on the hill become as sharp-sighted as an eagle, even if they were blind from their youth." "Well," answered the first raven, "my eyes are not want for this healing bath, for heaven be praised, they are as good as they ever were. But my wing has been feeble and weak ever since it was shot by an arrow many years ago. So let us fly down to the lake at once, that I might be restored to health and strength again." And so they flew away. Their words rejoiced Ferko's heart, and he waited impatiently until evening should come, and he could rub the precious dew on his sightless eyes. At last it began to grow dusk, and the sun sank behind the mountains. Gradually it became cooler on the hill, and the wet grass grew with dew. Then Ferko buried his face in the ground till his eyes were damp with dewdrops, and in a moment he saw clearer than he had ever done in his life before. The moon was shining brightly and lighted him to the lake where he could bathe his poor broken legs. Then Ferko crawled to the edge of the lake and dipped his limbs in the water. No sooner had he done so than he felt his legs as sound and strong as they had been before, and Ferko thanked the kind fate that had led him to the hill where he had overheard the ravens' conversations. He filled a bottle with the healing water, and continued his journey in the best of spirits. He had not gone far before he met a wolf, who was limping disconsolately along on three legs, and who, on perceiving Ferko, began to howl dismally. "My good friend," said the youth, "be of good cheer, for I can soon heal your leg." And with these words he poured some of the precious water over the wolf's paw, and in a moment the animal was springing about, sound and well on all four. The grateful creature thanked his benefactor warmly, and promised Ferko to do him a good turn, if he should ever need it. Ferko continued on his way till he came to a plowed field. Here he noticed a little mouse creeping warily along on its hind paw, for its front paw had been broken in a trap. Ferko felt so sorry for the little beast that he spoke to it in a most friendly manner and washed its small paw with the healing water. In a moment the mouse was sound and whole, and after thanking the kind physician, it scampered away over the plowed fields. Ferko again proceeded on his journey, but he hadn't gone far before a queen bee flew against him, trailing one wing behind her, which had been cruelly torn in two by a big bird. Ferko was no less willing to help her than he had been willing to help the wolf and the mouse, so he poured some healing drops over the wounded wing. On the spot, the queen bee was cured, and turning to Ferko, said, "I'm grateful for your kindness, and shall reward you someday." And with these words, she flew away, humming gaily. Then Ferko wandered on for many a long day, and at length reached a strange kingdom. Here, he thought to himself, he might as well go straight to the palace and offer his services to the king of the country, for he had heard that the king's daughter was as beautiful as the day. So he went to the royal palace, and as he entered the door, the first people he saw were his two brothers who had treated him so badly. They had managed to obtain places in the king's service, and when they recognized Furco with his eyes and legs sound and well, they were frightened to death, for they feared he would tell the king of their conduct, and that they would be hung. No sooner had Furco entered the palace than all eyes were turned on the handsome youth, and the king's daughter herself was lost in admiration, for she had never seen anyone so handsome in her life before. His brothers noticed this, and envy and jealousy were added to their fear, so much so that they determined once more to destroy him. They went to the king and told him that Furco was a wicked magician who had come to the palace with his intention of carrying off the princess. Then the king had Furco brought before him and said, "You are accused of being a magician who wishes to rob me of my daughter, and I condemn you to death. If you can fulfill 3 tasks, I shall set you to do your life will be spared, on condition you leave the country. But if you cannot perform what I demand, you shall be hung on the nearest tree." And, turning to the 2 wicked brothers, he said, "Suggest something for him to do, no matter how difficult. He must succeed in it, or die." They did not think long, but replied, "Let him build your majesty in one day a more beautiful palace than this, and if he fails in the attempt, let him be hung." The king was pleased with this proposal and commanded Furco to set forth at work the following day. The 2 brothers were delighted, for they thought they had got rid of Furco forever. The poor youth himself was heartbroken and cursed the hour he had crossed the boundary into the king's domain. As he was wandering disconsolately about the meadows around the palace, wondering how he could escape being put to death, a little bee flew past, and settling on his shoulder, whispered in his ear, "What is troubling you, my kind benefactor? Can I be of any service to you? I am the bee whose wing you healed, and would like to show my gratitude in some way." Furco recognized the queen bee and said, "Alas, how can you help me? For I have been set to do a task which no one in the whole world could do, let him be ever such a genius. Tomorrow I must build a palace more beautiful than the king's, and it must be finished before evening." "Is that all?" answered the bee. "Then you may comfort yourself, for before the sun is down tomorrow night, a palace shall be built unlike any the king has dwelt in before. Just stay here till I come again, and tell you that it is finished." Having said this, she flew merrily away, and Furco, reassured by her words, lay down on the grass and slept peacefully until the next morning. On the following day, the whole town was on its feet, and everyone wondered how and where the stranger would build the wonderful palace. The princess alone was silent and sorrowful, and had cried all night till her pillow was wet, so much did she take the fate of the beautiful youth to heart. Furco spent the whole day in the meadow, waiting until the return of the bee, and when evening came, the queen flew by and perched on his shoulder, and she said, "The wonderful palace is ready. Be of good cheer, and lead the king to the hillside just outside the city walls." And, humming gaily, she flew away again. Ferko at once went to the king and told him the palace was finished. The whole court went to see the wonder, and their astonishment was great at the sight which met their eyes. A splendid palace reared itself on the hill just outside the walls of the city, made of the most exquisite flowers that ever grew in a mortal garden. The roof was all of crimson roses, the windows of lilies, the walls of white carnations, the floors of growing auriculas and violets, the doors of gorgeous tulips and narcissi, with sunflowers for the knockers. And all around were hyacinthus and other sweet-smelling flowers bloomed in masses, so that the air was perfumed far and near, and enchanted all who were present. The splendid palace had been built by the grateful Queen Bee, who had summoned all the other bees in the kingdom to help her. The king's amazement knew no bounds, and the princess's eyes beamed with delight as she turned them from the wonderful building on the delighted Ferko. But the two brothers had grown quite green with envy, and only declared the more that Ferko was nothing but a wicked magician. The king, although he had been surprised and astonished at the way his commands had been carried out, was very vexed that the stranger should escape with his life, and turning to the two brothers he said, "He has certainly accomplished this first task, and the aid, no doubt, of his diabolical magic. But what shall we give him to do now? Let us make it as difficult as possible, and see if he fails, then he should die." Then the eldest brother replied, "The corn has all been cut, but has not been put into the barns. Let the knave collect the grain from the kingdom into the one big heap before tomorrow night. And if as much of a stalk of corn is left, let him be put to death." The princess grew white with terror when she heard these words, but Ferko felt much more cheerful than he had done the first time, and wandered out into the meadow again, wondering how he was to get out of this difficulty. But he could think of no way of escape, and the sun sank to rest and night came on, when a little mouse started out of the grass at Ferko's feet, and said to him, "I am delighted to see you, my kind benefactor, but why are you looking so sad? Can I be of any help to you, and thus repay your great kindness to me?" Then Ferko recognized the mouse whose front paw he had healed, and replied, "Alas, how can you help me in a matter that is beyond any human power? Before tomorrow night, all the grain in the kingdom has to be gathered into one big heap, and if as much as a stalk of corn is wanting, I must pay for it with my life." "Oh, is that all?" answered the mouse. "That needn't distress you so much. Just trust in me, and before the sun sets again, you shall hear that your task is done." And with these words, the little creatures scampered away into the fields. Ferko, who never doubted that the mouse would be as good as its word, lay down comforted on the soft grass and slept soundly till the next morning. The day passed slowly, and with the evening came the little mouse and said, "Now there's not a single stalk of corn left in the field. They're all collected in one big heap on the huts on the hill outside." Then Ferko went joyfully to the king and told him that all he demanded had been done, and the whole court went out to see the wonder, and were no less astonished than they had been the first time. For in a heap higher than the king's palace lay all the grain in the country, and not a single stalk of corn had been left behind in any of the fields. And how had all this been done? Well, the little mouse had summoned every other mouse in the kingdom to help, and together they had collected all of the grain. The king, he could not hide his amazement, but at the same time his wrath increased, and he was more ready than ever to believe the two brothers who kept on repeating that Ferko was nothing more or less than a wicked magician. Only the beautiful princess rejoiced over Farquhar's success and looked on him with friendly glances when the youth returned. The more the cruel king gazed on the wonder before him, the more angry he became, for he could not, in the face of his promise, put a stranger to death. He turned once more to the two brothers and said, "His diabolical magic has helped him again, but now a third task shall we set him to do. No matter how impossible it is, he must do it or die." The eldest answered quickly, "Let him drive all the wolves of the kingdom onto this hill before tomorrow night. If he does this, he may go free. If not, he shall be hung, as you said." At these words, the princess burst into tears, and when the king saw this, he ordered her to be shut up in a high tower and carefully guarded till the dangerous magician should either have left the kingdom or been hung on the nearest tree. Farquhar wandered out into the fields again and sat down on the stump of a tree, wondering what he should do next. Suddenly, a big wolf ran up to him and, standing still, said, "I'm very glad to see you again, my kind benefactor. What are you thinking about all alone by yourself? If I can help you in any way, only say the word, for I would like to give you proof of my gratitude." Farquhar at once recognized the wolf whose broken leg he had healed, and told him what he had to do the following day if he wished to escape with his life. "But how in the world," he added, "am I to collect all the wolves of the kingdom on top of that hill over there?" "Oh, if that's all you want done," answered the wolf, "you needn't worry yourself. I'll undertake the task, and you'll hear from me again before sunset tomorrow. Keep your spirits up." And with these words, he trotted quickly away. Then the youth rejoiced greatly, for now he felt that his life was safe, but he grew very sad when he thought of the beautiful princess, and that he would never see her again if he left the country. He lay down once more on the grass, and soon fell fast asleep. Oh, the next day he spent wandering about the fields. Towards evening, the wolf came running up to him in a great hurry and said, "I have collected together all the wolves in the kingdom, and they are waiting for you out in the wood. Go quickly to the king and tell him you will go to the hill, that he may see the wonder that you have done with his own eyes. Then return at once to me and get on my back, and I will help you drive all the wolves together." Then Farquhar went straight to the palace and told the king that he was ready to perform the third task if he would come to the hill and see it done. Farquhar himself returned to the fields, and mounting on the wolf's back, he rode to the wood close by. As quick as lightning, the wolf flew around the wood, and in a minute many hundred wolves rose up before him, increasing in number every moment, till they could be counted by thousands. He drove them all before him on the hill where the king and his whole court and Farquhar's two older brothers were standing. Only the lovely princess was not present, for she was shut up in the tower weeping bitterly. The wicked brothers stamped and foamed with rage when they saw the failure of their wicked designs. But the king was overcome by sudden terror when he saw the enormous pack of wolves approaching nearer and nearer. And calling out to Farquhar, he said, "Enough, enough! We don't want to see any more." But on the wolf whose back Farquhar sat said to its rider, "Go on, go on." And at the same moment, many more wolves ran up the hill, howling horribly and showing their white teeth. The king, in his terror, called out, "Stop a moment! I will give you half my kingdom if you will drive all the wolves away." But Ferko pretended not to hear and drove some more thousands before him, so that everyone quaked with horror and fear. Then the king raised his voice again and called out, "Stop! You shall have my whole kingdom, if you will only drive these wolves back to the places they came from." But the wolf kept encouraging Ferko and said, "Go on, go on." So he led the wolves on, till at last they fell on the king and his wicked brothers, and ate them and the whole court up in a moment. Then Ferko went straight to the palace and set the princess free, and on the same day he married her and was crowned king of the country, and the wolves all went peacefully back to their own homes, and Ferko and his bride lived for many years in peace and happiness together, and were much beloved by great and small in the land.